David Chen stared out the window of his corner office on the 42nd floor, watching the tiny cars crawl through downtown traffic below. At 45, he had everything most people could only dream of. His tech company was worth nearly $2 billion. He owned homes in 3 countries. His garage held cars that cost more than most people's houses. But none of that mattered when he thought about the one thing money couldn't fix. His daughter Lucy was 12 years old, and she was the brightest light in his world. She had been born with cerebral palsy, which affected how she walked and sometimes made it hard for her to speak clearly. While other kids ran around playgrounds without a second thought, Lucy needed a walker to get around. Simple things that came naturally to other children required extra effort for her. David remembered the day the doctors first explained Lucy's condition. He had been young then, maybe too young to understand what it really meant. He threw himself into research, calling specialists around the world, spending hundreds of thousands on treatments and therapies. He was determined to fix everything for his little girl, the way he fixed problems in his business. But some things couldn't be solved with money or determination. Lucy's mother, Jennifer, had tried to stay strong for the first few years. She went to every doctor's appointment, every therapy session, every specialist consultation. But watching other families with typical children became too painful for her. The stares from strangers, the whispered conversations, the way people would speak to David instead of acknowledging Lucy directly. It all became too much. When Lucy was 4, Jennifer packed her bags one morning while Lucy was at preschool. She left a letter explaining that she couldn't handle being the mother of a special needs child. She said she felt like a failure every day, and that Lucy and David deserved better than someone who couldn't love their situation completely. The divorce papers came a week later. David never let Lucy see how angry he was about her mother leaving. Instead, he poured all his energy into being both parents. He hired the best caregivers money could buy. He made sure Lucy had every accommodation, every tool, every opportunity to succeed. But he also became extremely protective, maybe too protective. Going out in public with Lucy was always stressful for David. He could see the way people looked at them, some with pity, others with curiosity, and worst of all, some with uncomfortable judgment. Children would stare until their parents pulled them away with embarrassed whispers. Adults would either avoid eye contact completely or speak to Lucy in that overly sweet voice people use with much younger children. David found himself choosing restaurants and activities based on how accepting the environment might be. He preferred upscale places where the staff was trained to be professional and discreet. He avoided busy family restaurants, theme parks, or anywhere crowds of children might gather. It wasn't that he was ashamed of Lucy. He was incredibly proud of her. But he couldn't stand watching her face fall when other kids stared or asked loud questions about why she walked differently. Lucy had learned to handle these situations with grace that amazed David. She would smile and explain that her legs just worked a little differently, but that she could still do lots of things other kids could do. She was an incredible artist, spending hours drawing detailed pictures that captured things most adults would miss. She had a memory for visual details that astonished her teachers. She could remember exactly what someone wore to a party 6 months ago or describe every painting in a museum after a single visit. But David saw how these public encounters affected her. At home, Lucy was confident and chatty. She would tell elaborate stories, ask a million questions about his work, and laugh at silly jokes until her sides hurt. But after difficult outings, she would become quiet and withdrawn. She started asking why she couldn't just be normal like other kids. Those questions broke David's heart every single time. He would sit on the edge of her bed and tell her that normal was overrated, that her uniqueness made her special, that some of the most interesting people in history were different from everyone else. But he could see in her eyes that she didn't quite believe him yet. The truth was, David struggled with the same questions Lucy asked. Not because he didn't love her exactly as she was, but because he wanted the world to see what he saw when he looked at his daughter. He saw intelligence, creativity, humor, and incredible determination. He saw a girl who worked twice as hard as other kids to achieve the same things and never complained about it. He saw someone who had taught him more about strength and resilience than any business challenge ever could. But most of the world only saw the walker first. David's business success had come from his ability to solve complex problems and think several steps ahead. In the corporate world, there was almost always a solution if you were smart enough and worked hard enough to find it. But parenting Lucy had taught him that some challenges couldn't be solved. They could only be navigated with love, patience, and hope. On this particular Tuesday afternoon, David made an unusual decision. Instead of working through lunch as he usually did, he decided to pick Lucy up from school early. Her regular caregiver had called in sick, and David realized he hadn't spent real one-on-one time with his daughter in weeks. When he arrived at Lucy's school, she lit up with surprise and excitement. Her teacher mentioned that Lucy had had a particularly good day, finishing a painting that had taken her weeks to complete. Lucy carefully carried her artwork to the car, chattering excitedly about the colors she had mixed and the story behind her painting. As they drove through the city, David asked Lucy what she wanted to do with their unexpected afternoon together. He mentally prepared his usual list of safe, comfortable places they could visit. But Lucy surprised him with her answer. "Can we go somewhere different today, Dad? Somewhere we've never been before?" David felt his protective instincts kick in immediately. Different meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant potentially difficult situations. But looking at Lucy's hopeful face in the rearview mirror, he couldn't bring himself to say no. "Okay, sweetheart, let's find somewhere new." As they drove through an unfamiliar part of town, Lucy spotted a small diner with cheerful red and white checkered curtains in the windows. A hand-painted sign read, "Rose's Family Diner, home cooking since 1985. That one, Dad. It looks friendly." David hesitated. This was exactly the kind of place he usually avoided. Busy, family-oriented, full of people who might stare. But Lucy was already excited and he had promised her something different. "All right, Lucy, Rose's it is." As they pulled into the parking lot, David took a deep breath and reminded himself that this was just lunch. How difficult could it be? The moment they walked through the door of Rose's Family Diner, David felt his shoulders tense. The place was exactly what he had expected. Busy, loud, and full of families with children. The smell of bacon and coffee filled the air, and conversations buzzed from every direction. Several people looked up when they entered, their eyes inevitably drawn to Lucy's bright pink walker. David's protective instincts immediately went into overdrive. He began scanning the room for the quickest exit, already preparing excuses for why they might need to leave early. But Lucy seemed completely unbothered by the attention. She was too busy taking in all the interesting details of the diner, the vintage photographs on the walls, the spinning stools at the counter, and the display case full of homemade pies. A woman approached them with a genuine smile that immediately caught David's attention. She appeared to be in her late 20s with dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail and kind eyes that seemed to sparkle with warmth. Her name tag read Isabella, and unlike most people they encountered, she didn't hesitate or seem uncomfortable when she saw Lucy. "Hi there. Welcome to Rose's. Table for two?" What struck David immediately was that Isabella spoke directly to both of them, making eye contact with Lucy just as naturally as she did with him. Most servers would address their questions to David, treating Lucy as if she weren't there or couldn't speak for herself. "Yes, please," Lucy responded cheerfully. "Could we sit by the window? I like to watch the people walking by." "Absolutely. I know just the perfect spot." Isabella led them to a cozy booth near the front window, walking at a pace that matched Lucy's without making it obvious that she was slowing down. As they settled into their seats, she pulled out her order pad and knelt down slightly, so she was at Lucy's eye level. "So, what kind of drinks can I get started for you two? We have really good chocolate milk if you're interested, and the strawberry lemonade is my personal favorite." Lucy's face lit up. "Strawberry lemonade sounds amazing. I've never tried that before." "Well, you picked a great day to try something new. And for you, sir?" David ordered coffee, still watching this interaction with fascination. Isabella treated Lucy like any other customer, not with the overly sweet voice many adults used with her, and not with the careful distance others maintained. She was simply natural and friendly. When Isabella returned with their drinks, she set Lucy's lemonade down with a flourish. "One strawberry lemonade for the lady and coffee for Dad. Now, have you had a chance to look at the menu? Or would you like me to tell you about our specials?" Lucy immediately launched into questions about the different options, and Isabella patiently answered each one. She described the pancakes as fluffy as clouds, explained that the grilled cheese was made with 3 different types of cheese, and mentioned that the chicken strips were her nephew's absolute favorite. As they talked, David noticed something remarkable happening. Lucy was completely relaxed and engaged in a way he rarely saw when they were out in public. She wasn't watching for stares or preparing to explain her walker to curious strangers. She was just being herself, a bright, funny 12-year-old girl chatting with a friendly waitress about lunch options. "I think I want the chocolate chip pancakes," Lucy finally decided. "But can I ask you something?" "Of course, honey. What's on your mind? Do you think chocolate chips make everything better?" "Because my dad says they do, but I wanted a second opinion." Isabella laughed, a genuine sound that made even David smile. "Well, your dad sounds like a very wise man. I personally believe that chocolate chips are basically magic. They can turn a regular Tuesday into a celebration." Lucy giggled and looked at David with a triumphant expression. "See, Dad? I told you chocolate chips were important." David found himself actually relaxing for the first time since they'd walked in. "I guess I've been outvoted by the experts." When Isabella brought their food, she did something that surprised David even more. As she set down Lucy's plate of pancakes, she mentioned casually, "I cut these into smaller pieces because I think they taste better that way. Plus, it's easier to get the perfect bite with syrup and chocolate chips in every piece." David realized that Lucy had been struggling slightly with cutting her food, something that required more coordination than it did for other kids her age. But Isabella had solved the problem without making Lucy feel self-conscious about needing help. She had presented it as a personal preference rather than an accommodation. "That's so smart," Lucy exclaimed. "I always have trouble getting the perfect bite, right? It's all about the engineering of the perfect pancake bite." As they ate, Isabella checked on them a couple of times, but her attention never felt forced or overly attentive. She treated them exactly like any other family enjoying lunch together. She asked Lucy about school, complimented her sparkly nail polish, and even shared a funny story about a customer who had once tried to order a sandwich made entirely of pickles. About halfway through their meal, disaster struck. Lucy was reaching for her napkin when her elbow caught the edge of her water glass. The glass tipped over, sending water cascading across the table and dripping onto the floor. The sound of the glass hitting the table was loud enough that several nearby tables turned to look. David felt his stomach drop. This was exactly the kind of situation he had been dreading. He could see Lucy's face beginning to crumple with embarrassment as she realized that people were staring. He was already reaching for his wallet, preparing to pay quickly and get them out of there before the situation became more uncomfortable. But before he could say anything, Isabella appeared at their table with a stack of clean towels and a warm smile. "Oh my goodness, water glasses have it out for me today. This is the third one that's decided to take a swimming lesson this afternoon." She began calmly cleaning up the spill while continuing to chat. "You know, during my very first week working here, I spilled an entire tray of milkshakes. And I mean the whole tray. 5 different flavors, all over this poor businessman who was wearing a really expensive suit." Lucy looked up from her embarrassment, intrigued despite herself. "What happened?" "Well, let me tell you. Chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla milkshake is not a good look on anyone, especially not mixed together. The poor guy had milkshake in his hair, all over his briefcase, everywhere. I was absolutely mortified." Isabella continued cleaning while she talked, making the whole process seem completely routine and unimportant. "But you know what? He was incredibly nice about it. He said that getting covered in milkshakes was probably the most interesting thing that had happened to him all week. We still laugh about it whenever he comes in." By the time Isabella finished cleaning up, Lucy was giggling at the mental image of a businessman covered in milkshakes. The embarrassment had completely disappeared, replaced by amusement and the relief that comes from realizing that accidents happen to everyone. "There we go, good as new," Isabella said, placing a fresh glass of water on the table. "And Lucy, can I tell you a secret? I actually prefer my tables with a little bit of adventure. Makes the day more interesting." As Isabella walked away to help other customers, David sat in amazement. In the span of 5 minutes, this waitress had taken what could have been a traumatic experience for Lucy and turned it into a moment of connection and laughter. She had done it so naturally, without any apparent effort or calculation. David began to really watch Isabella as she worked with other customers throughout the diner. He noticed that she seemed to have the same natural warmth with everyone. She knew regular customers by name, remembered how they liked their coffee, and asked about their families. With children, she was patient and engaging without being condescending. With elderly customers, she was respectful and attentive without being overly solicitous. But David also noticed something else. At a table near the back of the diner sat a young man who appeared to have some kind of developmental disability. He was carefully counting coins from his pocket, seeming frustrated as he tried to figure out if he had enough money for his order. David watched as Isabella approached the table during her break, sitting down across from the young man with the same natural ease she had shown Lucy. David couldn't hear their conversation, but he could see Isabella patiently helping the young man count his money. When he got the amount right, she celebrated with him, giving him a high five that made his whole face light up. There was nothing forced or performative about her interaction. It was simply one person helping another with kindness and respect. "Dad, I really like Isabella," Lucy said, drawing David's attention back to their table. "She makes me feel normal." Those words hit David like a physical blow, not because they hurt, but because they revealed something he hadn't fully understood before. Lucy didn't want to be treated as inspiration, or as someone to be pitied. She didn't want to be handled with extra care or spoken to differently. She just wanted to be treated like any other kid, and somehow, this waitress in a small family diner had understood that instinctively. Over the next 3 weeks, David found himself doing something he never would have expected. He started making regular trips to Rosa's diner. At first, he told himself it was just convenient. The food was good, the prices were reasonable, and Lucy enjoyed going there. But deep down, he knew the real reason was Isabella. There was something about the way she interacted with Lucy that David had never seen before. Isabella didn't treat his daughter like she was fragile or different. She didn't speak in that careful, overly gentle tone that most adults used with Lucy. Instead, she talked to her like she would talk to any interesting 12-year-old girl. About school, about art, about favorite movies and books. Lucy had started asking specifically to go to Isabella's restaurant. Whenever David suggested getting lunch together, she would light up the moment they walked through the door, immediately scanning the dining room to see if Isabella was working. When she spotted her, Lucy would wave enthusiastically, and Isabella would always wave back with genuine excitement. During their third visit, David learned something that surprised him. As they were finishing their meal, Isabella mentioned that she needed to leave a few minutes early that day because she had to get to her second job. "You work 2 jobs?" Lucy asked with the direct curiosity that only children possess. "I do," Isabella replied with a smile. "I work here during the day and then I clean office buildings at night. It keeps me pretty busy, but I don't mind. Hard work never hurt anybody, right?" David found himself wondering why someone who was clearly intelligent and capable was working 2 demanding jobs just to make ends meet. He began paying more attention to Isabella during their visits, noticing small details that painted a picture of someone who was struggling financially, but never complained about it. Her shoes were worn but always clean. Her work uniform was carefully maintained but showed signs of frequent washing. She never ordered food for herself during her breaks, usually just having coffee or water. When other staff members talked about weekend plans or shopping trips, Isabella would smile and listen but rarely contributed her own stories. During their 4th visit, David overheard a conversation that gave him more insight into Isabella's situation. She was talking to Rosa, the elderly woman who owned the diner, about her schedule. "I'm sorry I can't work the extra hours this weekend, Rosa. I need to spend some time with my brother. He gets upset when I'm gone too much." "Of course, mija. Family comes first. How is Carlos doing?" "He's doing really well. His therapist says he's making great progress with his social skills. He's even started helping out at the community center on weekends, organizing their art supplies." David's ears perked up at the mention of a brother needing therapy. After Rosa walked away, he found himself curious about Isabella's family situation, but he didn't feel comfortable asking directly. Instead, he began listening more carefully to the small pieces of information Isabella shared naturally during their conversations. He learned that Isabella was studying online to become a special education teacher. Though she had to take classes slowly because of her work schedule, she mentioned that she had grown up helping her younger brother, who had autism, and that experience had inspired her to want to work with children who had special needs. "It's funny," she told Lucy during one of their visits. "Some people think having a brother with autism was hard for our family, but honestly, Carlos taught me more about patience and creativity than anyone else ever has. He sees the world in such unique ways. Sometimes I think he understands things better than the rest of us do. Lucy listened to these stories with fascination. She had never met another family that talked about disability in such a positive, matter-of-fact way. Most adults either avoided the topic entirely or spoke about it in hushed, serious tones that made Lucy feel like there was something wrong with her. David realized that Isabella's natural ease with Lucy wasn't just kindness. It was experience. She had grown up navigating the world with someone who was different, and she understood instinctively how to treat people with disabilities with respect and normalcy. During their 5th visit, David made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of his usual business lunch or quick meal, he lingered at the diner longer than necessary. When Isabella brought their check, he asked if she had a few minutes to talk. "Of course. Lucy, did you want to color while your dad and I chat? I have some really good crayons behind the counter." As Lucy settled in with her coloring, David found himself in unfamiliar territory. He was used to conducting meetings and negotiations, but this felt completely different. He wasn't sure how to begin a personal conversation with someone he barely knew, even though he felt like he understood something important about Isabella's character. "I hope you don't mind me asking," David began carefully, "but I've noticed how wonderful you are with Lucy. You have a gift for making her feel comfortable and accepted. I was wondering if that comes from your experience with your brother?" Isabella's face softened. "It does, actually. Carlos is 24 now, and he's taught me so much about what it means to be different in a world that doesn't always understand. When I see Lucy, I see someone who's smart and funny and creative, just like Carlos. The fact that she uses a walker doesn't change any of those things." "Most people don't see it that way," David admitted. "They see the walker first, and sometimes it feels like they never see anything else." "I know. It used to make me so angry when people would stare at Carlos or treat him like he couldn't understand what they were saying. But I've learned that most people aren't trying to be cruel. They just don't know how to act around people who are different. They're afraid of saying the wrong thing, so they end up not saying anything at all. Or they overcompensate and become weird and overly helpful." David nodded, recognizing the exact behaviors Isabella was describing. "So how do you know what to do instead?" "I just treat people the way I want to be treated. Carlos taught me that everyone wants to feel valued and respected. Everyone wants to be seen for who they are, not just for their challenges or differences. When I meet someone like Lucy, I try to focus on getting to know her as a person first." As they talked, David found himself sharing things he rarely discussed with anyone. He told Isabella about Lucy's mother leaving, about his own struggles with being overprotective, and about his constant worry that the world would never see Lucy the way he did. "The thing is," David continued, "Lucy is incredible. She's artistic and smart and has this amazing memory for visual details. She works twice as hard as other kids and never complains about it, but all most people see is a kid who's different." Isabella listened thoughtfully. "You know, Carlos used to get frustrated about the same thing. He's incredibly talented. He can play piano like you wouldn't believe, and he has this amazing ability to remember patterns and details. But for a long time, all he heard from the world was what he couldn't do instead of celebrating what he could do. How did you help him get past that?" "Honestly, it wasn't me. It was finding other people who saw his abilities first. Carlos started volunteering at a community center, where they needed help organizing art supplies and materials. The people there got to know him as Carlos the helpful volunteer, who never forgot where anything went. Not Carlos the guy with autism. It changed how he saw himself." David felt something click into place. Lucy needed more people like Isabella in her life. People who would see her strengths first and treat her differences as just one part of who she was, not the defining characteristic. As their conversation continued, David learned more about Isabella's own challenges. She had been trying to finish her degree in special education for 3 years, but between working 2 jobs and helping support her brother, she could only afford to take 1 or 2 classes each semester. Student loans were difficult to qualify for because of her family's complicated financial history, and she was determined not to take on debt she might not be able to repay. "It's frustrating sometimes," Isabella admitted. "I know I could help so many kids if I could just finish my degree and get into a classroom. But life has its own timeline, you know? I'll get there eventually." David found himself impressed not just by Isabella's patience and optimism, but by her determination to achieve her goals despite significant obstacles. She wasn't asking for help or complaining about her circumstances. She was simply working steadily toward her dream while maintaining her positive attitude and caring for others along the way. As they prepared to leave that day, Lucy surprised both adults by giving Isabella a spontaneous hug. "Thank you for being so nice to me," Lucy said simply. "You make me feel like I can do anything." Isabella hugged her back, and David saw tears in the young woman's eyes. "You can do anything, Lucy. Don't ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Walking to the car, David realized that he had just witnessed something profound. His daughter, who often struggled with confidence in public settings, had just expressed genuine gratitude for being treated with simple human kindness. And Isabella, despite her own challenges and busy schedule, had taken the time to make a real connection with a child who needed exactly what she had to offer. For the first time in months, David felt hopeful about Lucy's future in a way that had nothing to do with medical treatments or expensive therapies. Sometimes the most powerful medicine was just being seen and accepted for who you really are. 2 weeks later, David and Lucy were settling into their usual booth at Rosa's when David noticed something was different about his daughter. She seemed quieter than usual, less excited about their weekly lunch tradition. When Isabella came over to greet them, Lucy managed only a small smile instead of her usual enthusiastic wave. "Hey there, sweetheart," Isabella said, immediately picking up on Lucy's subdued mood. "Everything okay today?" Lucy shrugged, playing with her napkin. "I guess so." David knew that look. Something had happened at school, and Lucy was trying to process it. He had learned over the years that pushing her to talk before she was ready usually backfired. So he waited patiently while Isabella took their drink order. As Isabella brought their drinks, she noticed that Lucy was still unusually quiet. Instead of launching into her usual cheerful chatter about the menu, Isabella sat down in the booth across from them. "You know what? I'm not very busy right now, and you look like maybe you could use a friend to talk to. Want to tell me about whatever's bothering you?" Lucy looked up, her eyes slightly watery. "Some kids at school were being mean today. They said things about the way I walk." David felt his familiar surge of protective anger, but he stayed quiet, sensing that Lucy needed to work through this herself. "What kind of things did they say?" Isabella asked gently. "They were imitating how I use my walker, pretending to walk all wobbly and making jokes about it. They thought it was funny. And when I told them to stop, they said I was being too sensitive and that I should learn to take a joke." Isabella's expression became serious, but not in the pitying way that most adults responded to Lucy's difficulties. Instead, she looked genuinely upset on Lucy's behalf. "That must have really hurt your feelings." It did. And the worst part is that other kids saw it happening, but nobody said anything to help me. They just watched or walked away. It made me feel like maybe I really am as weird as those kids said I was. David's heart broke listening to his daughter's pain, but he was amazed by how clearly she was expressing her feelings to Isabella. Usually it took hours of gentle questioning for Lucy to open up about difficult experiences at school. "Lucy, can I tell you something about my brother Carlos?" Isabella asked. "When he was in high school, there were some kids who used to make fun of the way he talked and acted. They would repeat things he said in mocking voices, or they would ask him questions just to get him confused so they could laugh at his answers." Lucy nodded, clearly interested in hearing more. It hurt Carlos's feelings so much that he stopped wanting to go to school. He started pretending to be sick so he could stay home. My mom and I were worried about him, but we didn't know how to help. "What happened?" Lucy asked. "Well, one day Carlos was having a particularly hard time in the cafeteria. Some kids were being especially cruel, and Carlos started crying, which just made them laugh harder. But then something amazing happened. A group of older students, kids who had never really talked to Carlos before, came over and sat with him. They told the mean kids to knock it off and leave Carlos alone." Isabella paused, making sure Lucy was following the story. But here's the really important part. Those older kids didn't just defend Carlos and walk away. They invited him to sit with them every day for the rest of the school year. They got to know him as a person, and they realized how funny and smart he was. By the end of the year, Carlos had real friends for the first time. "That's a nice story," Lucy said, "but the kids at my school aren't like that. Nobody wants to be friends with the weird girl who uses a walker." Isabella leaned forward. her voice becoming more intense. "Lucy, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You are not weird. You are not less than anyone else. You have a brain that creates beautiful art, a sense of humor that makes people laugh, and a kind heart that cares about others. The fact that your legs work differently doesn't change any of those things." David watched his daughter's face as Isabella spoke, seeing some of the sadness begin to lift. "The kids who were making fun of you today, they're not bad people, but they're making a big mistake. They're so focused on how you're different that they're missing out on getting to know someone really special. And honestly, that's their loss, not yours." Just as Isabella finished speaking, a commotion erupted from a table across the restaurant. A group of teenagers had been getting increasingly loud and obnoxious throughout their meal. Now they were openly mocking an elderly man at a nearby table who was having trouble reading the menu due to what appeared to be vision problems. "Hey, old man," one of the teenagers called out loudly. "Need us to read that for you? Maybe you should have brought your magnifying glass." The elderly gentleman looked embarrassed and flustered. Other diners were beginning to stare, but nobody seemed to know what to do. The situation was escalating quickly, and David could see that Lucy was watching with wide eyes, clearly connecting this scene to her own experience with bullies. Without hesitation, Isabella stood up from their booth and walked directly to the teenagers' table. David couldn't hear exactly what she said, but her body language was calm yet firm. She spoke quietly to the group for about 30 seconds, then handed them their check. The teenagers looked surprised and somewhat ashamed. They quickly paid their bill and left the restaurant without any further incident. Isabella then went over to the elderly gentleman, spoke with him briefly, and appeared to help him with his order. When she returned to David and Lucy's table, Lucy looked at her with something approaching awe. "What did you say to them?" Isabella sat back down, her cheeks slightly flushed from the confrontation. "I told them that making fun of people for things they can't control isn't funny. It's cruel. And I reminded them that someday they might be the ones who need help or understanding from others." "Were you scared to say something?" Lucy asked. "A little bit," Isabella admitted. "Confronting people is never easy. But you know what scared me more? The idea of sitting there and watching someone get hurt when I could do something to help." David realized he was witnessing something extraordinary. Isabella had just demonstrated exactly the kind of courage and kindness that Lucy needed to see. She had shown that standing up for others wasn't about being big or strong or powerful. It was about recognizing when something was wrong and choosing to act. "Lucy," Isabella continued, "what happened to you at school today was wrong. Those kids shouldn't have made fun of you, and the other kids who watched it happen should have spoken up. But here's what I want you to remember. Their behavior says something about them, not about you. But what if they're right? What if I am just a weird kid who doesn't fit in anywhere?" Isabella reached across the table and gently took Lucy's hand. "Honey, fitting in is overrated. Some of the most interesting, creative, and important people in history were the ones who didn't fit in. They were the ones who were different, who saw the world in unique ways, who had to work harder than everyone else." She paused, then continued with growing enthusiasm. "You know what I think? I think those kids at school are missing out on knowing someone incredible. They're so worried about what's normal that they can't see how amazing different can be." David watched his daughter's posture change as Isabella spoke. Lucy was sitting up straighter, her eyes brighter, her expression more confident. "And you know what else?" Isabella added with a smile. "If they can't appreciate how awesome you are, then they don't deserve to be your friends anyway. The right people, the people who matter, they're going to see what your dad and I see when we look at you." "What's that?" Lucy asked. "We see someone who's brave, creative, kind, and absolutely worth knowing. We see someone who makes the world more interesting just by being in it." For the first time since they'd arrived at the restaurant, Lucy smiled her real smile, the one that lit up her whole face and made her eyes sparkle. "Thanks, Isabella. I think I feel better now." As they finished their meal, David reflected on what he had just witnessed. Isabella had done something that no amount of money could buy, and no professional therapy had achieved. She had helped Lucy see herself through the eyes of someone who valued her for exactly who she was. But more than that, Isabella had shown Lucy what it looked like to stand up for others, to choose kindness over convenience, and to see challenges as opportunities to help rather than reasons to look away. David realized that his daughter needed more people like Isabella in her life, not just people who would accept her differences, but people who would celebrate them and help her see her own strength. That night, after Lucy had gone to bed, David sat in his home office staring at his computer screen. He had been researching Isabella's situation for the past 2 hours, and what he had discovered both impressed and troubled him. Through some discreet investigation, he had learned that Isabella had been on the dean's list every semester she had been able to take classes. Her professors consistently praised her insight, dedication, and natural ability to connect with students during her practicum work. She had volunteered over 500 hours at various special needs programs around the city, always on her own time and without any expectation of recognition or compensation. But David had also discovered the full extent of Isabella's financial struggles. She was supporting not just herself, but also contributing to her brother Carlos's ongoing therapy and care. Their parents had passed away in a car accident when Isabella was 19 and Carlos was 16, leaving her to navigate the complex world of disability services and support systems while finishing her own education. Isabella had been working multiple jobs for over 8 years, slowly chipping away at her degree 1 or 2 classes at a time. At her current pace, it would take her another 3 years to graduate and begin her career as a special education teacher. David calculated that she was probably earning less in a month than he spent on a single business lunch. The disparity seemed almost obscene to David, especially considering the impact Isabella had already made on his daughter's life in just a few weeks. Lucy had been more confident, more willing to try new activities, and more positive about herself since they started visiting Rosa's diner. The change wasn't dramatic, but it was real and meaningful. David had spent millions of dollars on Lucy's medical care, therapy, and education over the years. He had hired the best specialists, purchased the most advanced equipment, and enrolled her in the most prestigious programs. All of that had been important and helpful, but none of it had made Lucy feel as genuinely accepted and valued as Isabella's simple, natural kindness. As David thought about the situation, he realized he was facing a decision that could change multiple lives. He had the resources to solve Isabella's financial obstacles with relative ease. The question was whether he should, and if so, how to do it in a way that felt genuine rather than condescending. The next morning, David made several phone calls. He spoke with the dean of the education department at the local university, with the director of special education for the city school district, and with his own company's human resources department. By the end of the day, he had a plan. 2 days later, David and Lucy arrived at Rosa's for their usual lunch. Isabella greeted them with her typical warmth, but David could see that she looked tired. She had dark circles under her eyes, and her usual boundless energy seemed slightly diminished. "Long night?" David asked gently as Isabella brought their drinks. "I picked up some extra cleaning shifts this week," Isabella explained with a rueful smile. "Carlos has a big art show coming up at the community center, and I wanted to make sure I could take the whole weekend off to help him set up and be there for the opening." "That sounds wonderful," Lucy said enthusiastically. "I love art shows. Maybe we could come see Carlos's work." Isabella's face lit up despite her fatigue. "He would absolutely love that. Carlos gets so excited when people appreciate his art. He's been working on this series of paintings about patterns in nature. They're absolutely incredible." After they ordered their meal, David made his decision. "Isabella, could I talk to you about something?" "It's kind of important." "Of course," she replied, though David could see a flicker of concern in her eyes. "Lucy and I have been coming here for several weeks now, and I've been amazed by how you interact with her. You have a gift for making people feel valued and accepted, and I can tell that working with children who have special needs is your true calling." Isabella nodded, unsure where the conversation was heading. "I've also learned about your situation, how you're working multiple jobs while slowly finishing your degree, and how you're supporting your brother at the same time. I want you to know that I think what you're doing is incredible, but I also think you deserve some help." David took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would be crucial. "My company has been looking into starting a foundation focused on special needs education and support. We want to provide scholarships for people who are training to become special education teachers, and we also want to fund innovative programs that help children with disabilities." Isabella listened intently, her expression growing more interested and hopeful. "I would like to offer you a full scholarship to finish your degree, with the understanding that when you graduate, There would be a position waiting for you as the Director of Educational Programs for our foundation. The job would involve developing and overseeing programs for children with special needs, training other educators, and basically doing on a larger scale what you're already doing naturally. Isabella's eyes widened, and for a moment she seemed unable to speak. David continued quickly, wanting to make sure she understood the full scope of what he was offering. The scholarship would cover all your remaining tuition and expenses, and it would include a living allowance, so you wouldn't need to keep working 2 jobs while you finish school. The position with the foundation would come with a salary that would allow you to focus on your career and continue supporting Carlos without financial stress. I don't know what to say, Isabella whispered, tears beginning to form in her eyes. Lucy, who had been listening to the entire conversation, reached across the table and took Isabella's hand. Say yes! That way you can help lots of kids like me. David smiled at his daughter's enthusiasm, but he wanted to make sure Isabella understood something important. Isabella, this isn't charity. This is an investment in someone who has already proven their worth. Lucy has changed since we started coming here. She's more confident, more positive about herself, and more willing to try new things. You did that with nothing more than kindness and genuine acceptance. He paused, his voice becoming more emotional. I've spent years trying to find ways to help Lucy navigate a world that doesn't always understand her. I've hired experts and specialists and tried every program and therapy available. But in just a few weeks, you've given her something I couldn't buy at any price, the feeling that she's valued exactly as she is. Isabella was openly crying now, but David could see that they were tears of joy and relief rather than sadness. You really think I could do this job? You really think I could make a difference? Isabella, David said firmly, you're already making a difference. This would just give you the resources and platform to help a lot more children and families. Isabella took a shaky breath, then looked directly at David. Yes. Yes, absolutely yes. I can't believe this is real, but yes. Lucy let out a cheer that caused several other diners to look over and smile. Isabella laughed through her tears and pulled Lucy into a hug across the table. As the initial excitement settled, Isabella asked the question David had been expecting. But why? Why would you do this for someone you barely know? David thought carefully about his answer. Because you've taught me something important about what Lucy really needs. She doesn't need people to fix her or feel sorry for her. She needs people who see her strengths first and treat her differences as just one part of who she is. You do that naturally, and I think there are a lot of other children and families who need exactly what you have to offer. He paused, then added with complete honesty, and because watching you with Lucy has shown me what it looks like when someone truly sees and values another person for who they are. That's not a skill you can teach or buy, it's who you are, and that's exactly the kind of person I want leading programs for children with special needs. 3 months later, David and Lucy attended Carlos's art show at the community center. Isabella had been right. His paintings were absolutely incredible, full of intricate patterns and vibrant colors that seemed to dance across the canvas. Carlos was shy but clearly thrilled to have so many people appreciating his work. As David watched Isabella move through the crowd, introducing Carlos to visitors and helping him explain his artistic process, he realized that his decision had created exactly the kind of ripple effect he had hoped for. Isabella was now able to focus entirely on her studies, and she was excelling even more than before. She had already begun developing curricula for the Foundation's programs, and her professors were consistently amazed by her innovative approaches to special education. But the most important change was in Lucy. She carried herself differently now, with a confidence that came from knowing that there were people in the world who valued her exactly as she was. She had started participating more actively in school activities, and she had even made a few close friends who appreciated her artistic talents and sense of humor. Lucy tugged on David's sleeve, pulling him toward one of Carlos's paintings. Dad, look at this one. Doesn't it remind you of the patterns I like to draw? As David admired the artwork, he reflected on how a simple decision to try a different restaurant had led to such profound changes for everyone involved. Isabella had shown him that sometimes the most valuable gifts come from the most unexpected places, and that true generosity isn't about giving people what you think they need. It's about recognizing and supporting the gifts they already have. The gesture that had left everyone speechless wasn't just Isabella's kindness to Lucy. or David's offer to change Isabella's life. It was the recognition that extraordinary goodness exists in ordinary places, waiting to be acknowledged and supported by those who have the power to make a difference. And sometimes, all it takes is one person seeing another person's true worth to change everything.